Who are the hidden gems, the undrafted free agents that inevitably make every roster in the NFL? Who are the guys who could surprise us this year? America's guest, Jason Hirschhorn, has the latest.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. You can follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. America's guest, Jason Hirschhorn, on the show today. And this is going to be our Summer Friday because we are doing a Thursday night schedule release live show. So Thursday night at around 9 o'clock Eastern, when the schedule will have been fully released, we will go through game by game and do a way too early mock draft. We will do a way too early schedule preview. Hey, these are the games that could trip up the Packers. These are the games that are the most gettable. And then look at how the season overall shakes out. So Locked On Packers YouTube page. Find us there. We will be going live. So we'll kind of have two Thursday shows. That show will be in your podcast feed on Friday. But if you want to come hang out with us live on Thursday, that's why we're not having a Summer Friday. It's a Summer Thursday instead, which means I've already talked too long. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait behind the counter while the person orders whatever parts they happen to carry? Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go to RockAuto.com now and see all the parts available for your car or truck and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. Joining me now, it is America's guest, my co-founder at The Leap, and the founder of the UDFA Prospectus, a truly venerable series in the world of really, really deep dive Packers nerddom when it comes to roster stuff. No one does this better
I think that's
than
fair.
Jason. Yeah, look, this is part of your brand, and if you're not proud of it, I am proud of it for you. Jason, when you do this every year, you have to be looking at the rosters, right? Because we're trying to figure out who of these guys actually has a chance to make it. Before we get into the actual players here, when you're looking at this 2022 Packers team, I don't see that many roster spots available here. How many are you thinking about when you're going through this list and thinking, okay, these are the guys who could potentially sneak on the opening day roster?
Well, it's the opening day roster and the practice squad. In some
Right.
cases, like that's treated like an extra roster spot anyway. So to a certain extent, I think that you're right. You know, they drafted 11 players. That naturally is going to limit the amount of options for an undrafted player. You know, all things being equal, the team and most teams will probably take the player that they spent the draft pick on. But there are some caveats to that. Elton Jenkins, Robert Tonyan probably going to start the season on PUP. Those are two spots, even if they're not necessarily at those positions that the Packers could use other places. I think that's something you have to consider. And also, you just look at the track record of this particular team. At least at certain positions, they like to take UDFAs or rookie UDFAs because, one, they're cheap. That's a big component of this. Two, because they can find decent athletes in undrafted free agency and use them on special teams. And that was true even before they started to refocus on special teams this year with Rich Bisaccia and all those other additions. So I think those things, first and foremost, what you have to consider when you're trying to do a prediction model like this.
So let's talk about some of the players, because there are a couple guys, in whether it was in rookie camp or just when we saw this list of UDFAs come out, that I think got Packers fans excited. And the big name is Tyler Goodson, someone that is an Iowa player. So a lot of people in Big Ten country have actually seen him play, which can be tough in a lot of these UDFA cases. It's like, okay, I've seen that name one time. No, a lot of people that follow the Packers, that love the Packers, have probably seen Tyler Goodson play. What stood out to you when you ultimately had him make this list? And I want to use that by way of explanation for how you actually go through this and decide who to put on your UDFA prospectus.
Yeah, and he's kind of an interesting case too, because while he's undrafted, he is a player that came out early, and that factors into a lot of things, including age. But when it comes to looking at any of these players, the first thing I look at is not my evaluation of that player. That's actually further down the list. You look at the depth chart on the roster, or on the 90-man roster at that position. That's going to tell you a lot about their chances right off the bat. You look at the team's track record with undrafted players at that position, both in terms of how many they keep on the 53 and how many times they add others on the practice squad. And then, as we kind of discussed earlier, sort of open, flexible roster spots, players who are going to be on the team in some capacity, but they might start the year on the PUP, or they start the year suspended. Like, those are things you look at, because again, it's going to tell you how many spots are available to a UDFA. And then you get to the evaluation, and that brings us to Tyler Goodson. So he is not as big as almost any of the running backs on the Packers roster, but he's not that much smaller. And I try to make this point in the piece. He is smaller than Aaron Jones, but physically and athletically, he's actually pretty similar. He's about the same height, about 5 to 10 pounds lighter. And then in almost every athletic measure, he's either right in line, right in step with Jones, in some cases even a little better. I mean, this is a superb athlete, a 9.53 RAS, and he was really productive at Iowa. And then you look at what he can be for this Packers team, whether it's on the 53 or someone they want to develop on the practice squad. Well, one, he can factor into the Packers passing game, even though he's a running back. He's someone who does look a lot like Tyler Ervin, a name that Packers fans will remember, even though it wasn't last season. He can perform that role athletically, even if he didn't do that at Iowa. He has the body type and the physical skill set for that. And then you look at his potential for special teams contribution. Now, he didn't return a lot of kicks at Iowa, but he practiced that every year that he was in that program. So even if he's not doing it, it is not because the coaches don't feel that he can. He might have just been too valuable in their eyes to use on kick and punt return. That is the way that Kirk Ferentz and that Iowa program have tended to operate. So he can contribute there. He can also contribute as like a gunner and some of those coverage units. So a lot of flexibility there. And then let's look at that depth chart. Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon right at the top, bar entry. Those guys are going to be the literal or de facto starters. Behind them, a lot of open questions. They do like, or at least they did like prior to the injury, Kylan Hill and what he can contribute both on offense and on special teams, but he's coming off that ACL. Patrick Taylor was essentially the call-up after Kylan Hill went down, and he was fine, but he was certainly nothing special, at least not in that first appearance. And then you look what else they have. They have another undrafted free agent, BJ Baylor, who, he does have some talent too. I just think Goodson is probably a better fit for Green Bay. And that's kind of the situation. The Packers will probably keep 3 on the active roster, maybe 4. And if they don't keep 4 on the active roster, they will probably keep 1 on the practice squad. That bodes very, very, very positively for a player like Goodson. So that's ultimately why he made the list.
You have a couple other players on this list. Is there a name that, other than Goodson, really stands out as, if I'm going to pick another guy who I think has the best chance of making either this team or the practice squad, it's this one?
I guess it's hard to say. This was not, this was a large group of UDFAs for the Packers, but it also wasn't, outside of Goodson, the most notable in terms of big programs and big contributions. One of the guys, though, that stuck out to me, again, made the list, was Chauncey Manic out of Louisiana. Now, the reason why he's interesting, and we've talked about this before on your podcast and certainly at the Leap, the Packers love undrafted edge rushers. It's like, going back to the early Ted Thompson era, it is their thing. This is where they found Frank Zombo. This is where they found Vic Soto, which is to say that, the outcome of these players can vary significantly, but they made the roster. I included what I believe to be the full list that made it from 2010 to present as undrafted rookie edge rushers.
It's
it was
10
11.
guys or 11. Yeah. Sorry. I miscounted here.
Yeah. So it is a lot. And Chauncey Manic is very interesting, not just because he is an edge rusher, but because it's a position that the Packers do have some, they have some depth concerns there. The top two guys were Sean Gary, Preston Smith. You don't have a lot of questions about as long as they're healthy. And they drafted Kingsley Enagbare. It's going to take me a while to get used to pronouncing that name. And he's likely to make the roster because he's a draft pick. And he's, I think, best positioned to be that tertiary edge rusher if they don't add a veteran. After him, it's kind of a free-for-all. And an undrafted rookie who shows out well in training camp and the preseason has a very good shot at taking one of those spots, or at least getting stashed on the practice squad. And what's interesting about this player in particular, he was extremely productive his final year at Louisiana, but he's not the typical kind of player you would see at Louisiana. He started his college career at Georgia, which, as we know, is something that the Packers front office really likes. He comes with a very, it's a mixed athletic profile in terms of his testing, but that top end straight line speed is in that absolute elite tier. So even if he's only a one trick pony, finding that kind of guy in undrafted free agency isn't out of the question for a team like the Packers. Again, we've seen them do it before. So I think he's also fairly well positioned to earn one of those spots or land on the practice squad.
A name that I think people are going to recognize as well, and you mentioned this in your piece for The Leap, a newsletter we would both love for you to subscribe to, is Trey Sterling. And what you pointed out is if he doesn't run 4.7, which is pretty slow, he probably is drafted. Now, there are going to be people who are going to say, well, but watch him play football. He plays faster than that. Maybe. But I do think at a position like safety where they don't have a ton behind their starters, and this is traditionally where players make their bones and teams make their bones on special teams, is with guys like safety 3, safety 4, linebacker 5. He's the kind of guy to me that fits the profile of, hey, he can make this team on special teams, and then if they have to play him, there's some things at least to work with here.
Yeah, and also point out that he suffered a wrist injury that cost him a lot of time late in his college career. So you throw in that, you throw in the poor 40, and you can see how a player who had a very productive college career can go undrafted. Now, the 40 and just his speed in general is going to be the big question. It's the question with most safeties. But if he's someone who can contribute on special teams and just be a reasonable person out there on defense during the preseason, again, he's unlikely to have to play there during the regular season, at least as things stand currently. That might be enough. Again, this goes back to the depth chart. The guys at the top of the depth chart, we know who they are. And as long as they're healthy, they are going to be the starters. And I mean, it's a pretty good tandem. And it's that third safety, as you pointed out, where things get a little dicey because they like playing with three safeties. That might change a little bit with the addition of Quay Walker. And I know you have a piece coming out in the not too distant future that might address some of those things. Mm-hmm. But as it pertains to the safeties, they drafted Tariq Carpenter, and he's officially listed as a safety, but you look at his size and you even look at the way that the team's talking about him, he's probably a sub-package linebacker. He's not someone that they're likely to want to put deep in center field. So even if he's making the roster, that's probably just not a role he's going to operate in on defense. And you look at the other guys, Sean Davis returns from last year, Vernon Scott returns, former draft pick, Enos Gaines returns. None of those guys are locks. And not all of those guys have the skill set to be that deep safety anyway. So Sterling, again, if he can show good instincts and if he can show the ability to contribute on special teams, there's a lot there to like. And to think that he can make the roster or the practice squad. And as we saw with last year with Enos Gaines in particular, they're willing to take safeties if they have upside.
I think for all those same reasons, when we talk about the combination of special teams and where this depth chart is, Raleigh Tejada, the cornerback from Baylor that's on your list, is another one that's intriguing to me because after you get past those top 3 guys, then it's like anyone? Like there's not really anyone on the roster who is a special teams core player. Shamar Jean-Charles is not that, or has any kind of experience in the NFL. Now Keshawn Nixon, who they brought in from the Raiders, was a core special teamer there, but I can't imagine he's a stone cold lock to make this roster. That gives someone like Raleigh Tejada a chance if they can, let's say, show some return skills, show some skills as a gunner to then parlay that into some opportunities to prove in the preseason, for example, hey, I can actually play corner too.
Yeah, and even if Nixon was to play meaningful snaps from scrimmage, it's going to be in the slot. It's very limited. Whereas someone like Tejada, thank you for helping with that pronunciation. It took me a few tries. He is, he's not the tallest corner, but he has the athletic profile to stick on the boundary if that's where they want to play him. I mean, he's one of the better athletes relative to his position in the Packers rookie class, not just the undrafted rookies. So that certainly helps. He played at Baylor. That's a league with a lot of passing. So you know that he has plenty of experience. And to your point, there just isn't a lot of depth after that top group. And that top group is fantastic. And if they're healthy, they may not need another corner to play meaningful snaps. But, Gene Charles, he was a draft pick last year. I think they still have high hopes for him, and he's a good chance of making the roster. But that's not a guarantee if he underperforms. And he did not have a great preseason as a rookie. So the spotlight is really going to be on him. You look behind those guys, Keshawn Nixon is entering his, I'm going to estimate his 17th season trying to make the Packers roster.
Checks out.
And, there's just no one else of note there as it pertains to actually playing cornerback. I think Nixon has a pretty good shot at making the roster, but we can tell very clearly, given where he came from, what he did with the Raiders, that he's going to be there for special teams and an emergency option on defense in all likelihood. So again, Tejada, with his athletic profile, with his experience, and with the lack of options after those top three, he's, again, well-positioned. That's why we use that language in the piece, well-positioned to earn a roster spot or a job on the practice squad.
Yeah, Keshawn Nixon was like that quarterback at the random Big 12 school. You're just like, wait, that guy's still what? And they've been in college football for what seems like 10 years.
You missed the opportunity to make a Nathan Peterman joke. I just want you to know that.
Dang, we might have to edit this out and I can just put it in. No, we won't do that. One name that I want to ask you that is not in the piece because he is not a rookie UDFA, which makes him ineligible for this particular experiment, is Caleb Jones, who I think he got Matt LaFleur got questions about Caleb Jones after rookie camp, just because this guy is enormous, 6'9", 370. Matt LaFleur said it's the biggest guy he's ever coached. He was technically in the 2021 class, which is why he's not a part of this piece. What would be intriguing about him, if anything, and what do you think his chances are of actually finding probably a spot on the practice squad?
So a point of correction, and we were confused for one another in our pre-show meeting. I thought you were talking about Kobe Jones, who was a rookie in a previous year. Caleb Jones is actually a rookie, the extremely large human out of Indiana. So he was eligible and he was considered. Now, the biggest thing working against him, as we already talked about during this podcast, is the depth chart. The Packers spent 3 picks on the offensive line. They spent multiple picks recently on the offensive line in previous seasons. And even if you assume, as we are, that Elton Jenkins is going to start the season on the PUP, there's still a lot of guys that are at least as well positioned to make the roster as him, if not better positioned. Bakhtiari is obviously making the roster if he's healthy. John Runyon's making the roster and is probably starting. Josh Myers is making the roster and probably starting. Royce Newman is making the roster. Even if he's not starting, then you have Yosh Nijman, who I guess you could say is at least a contention for the right tackle spot, if not the front runner, while Elton Jenkins is recovering. The 2 rookies that they drafted in the middle rounds, Sean Ryan and Zach Tom. I always want to say Tom Zach, and it's going to be a while before I get that one right.
They picked 2 guys who have 2 first names. How are we supposed to keep this straight?
They did it to hurt us, Peter, and we should take it personally. And then they also drafted, with one of their very last picks, Rasheed Walker. And, Walker is a 7th round pick, may not make the roster, but he's not in a worse position to make the roster than Caleb Jones. And, there were some, including NFL.com, who thought that he could go in the 3rd round. So there was talent there. There's athleticism there. They have Cole Van Lanten returning from last year. I don't think he's guaranteed a roster spot or even a spot on the practice squad, but a full year in the system, a year to physically mature, I think is going to give him some advantages. So you look at all of those names, and I guess you could also throw in like Jake Hansen, who is back for, I want to say, a 3rd season.
I won't throw in Jake Hansen. It's
fine. The point being is that's a lot of competition for what may only end up being 7 or 8 spots. Now, they've gone 9 deep on their initial 53-man rosters at offensive line, but even in that configuration, even if Jenkins isn't part of it, that's still a lot of names that Caleb Jones would have to beat.
Yep.
And if they have 9 guys on the active roster plus a de facto 10th in Jenkins, are they going to keep another one on the practice squad? Maybe. It is possible, but those are the odds that Caleb Jones faces. And that's why he didn't make the cut for me, though. Again, with those tools, I know he gave up a lot of pressures and had a lot of penalties at Indiana his final season there, but clearly when you're that big, if you can bend at all, and clearly the Packers think there's at least a possibility that he can do that, then you're going to get a few chances.
And he likely will as we head into training camp. That's certainly a name that I'm going to have my eye on. Can't wait to see him in the preseason if indeed he makes it through to through some of these roster cuts. The roster can change a lot over the next couple weeks, couple months before we actually see these guys in training camp. So we can't even assume, the mini camp tryout guys. It's like one spot right on the roster right now. So not a lot of opportunities for them there. Jason, what else are you working on the Leap right now so people can check that out?
Well, it's early going, but this upcoming week, I will have a piece on who can be this season's version of Devondre Campbell for the Packers. And before anyone goes crazy, I'm not saying a guy who signs for pennies and becomes an all-pro, because that's just not a reasonable expectation for anyone. But I mean, a player who the Packers can sign at this late point in the offseason ends up becoming a key contributor or a starter at a position that tangibly affects their playoff and Super Bowl hopes.
Something that Brian Gutekunst has done essentially every year he's been GM. He has found someone in late stage free agency that has turned out to be, or at least second wave free agency, who's turned out to be an impactful player for them. Jason, thank you so much, as always, for coming on and being America's guest. And we'll talk to you soon.
Anytime, Peter.
All right. Thanks to Jason for coming on the show. Always great to talk to him. Would love for you to subscribe to The Leap. He had the t-shirt on. For those of you not watching on YouTube, you can buy that t-shirt over with our friends at Cotton Bureau. I have the link pinned to my Twitter bio if you'd like to get one. They are quite nice. They're quite comfortable. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Find all the latest news and sports, everything you need. Basketball playoffs are hot right now, just like Hansel. So hot right now. What a timely reference that is. Basketball playoffs, the Bucks take a 3-2 lead after a banger of a game against the Celtics. They come back and steal Game 5. BetOnline would have been a great place for you to have some money and for you to have bet on it. So head to the website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Now go make your second listen Locked On NFL. The schedule may be dark, but the NFL never stops, and neither does Locked On NFL. Get insight and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus Locked On NFL hosts from around all 32 squads. There's no offseason for real fans, so make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. All right, live show when you're listening to this, tonight, 9 Eastern, 8 Central, on Thursday night. Schedule release. We're going to go through it all. Locked On Packers YouTube page. Do not miss it. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to hit us up on the Locked On Packers fan hotline, you can do that, 920-341-3775 to stay Locked On Packers.